training. We are so happy to have you all here today with us. I would like to begin by letting you know that this presentation, will be recorded just for future reference. If there's any reason that you need to go back and view any of the information that I detailed today, you'll have the opportunity to because this training will be recorded. Yay! We do have a few housekeeping items before we get started. If there are any questions, you can put them in the chat box. You should be, I'm not exactly sure where it is on your screen, it's to the right of my screen. But if you have any questions, you can put them there. I will be monitoring the chat box as I go through and speak. So you can put them there. If not, then I'll get to them at the end of the presentation. If there is something that's pressing and you don't want to forget, then you can raise your hand. And like I said, I'm monitoring both screens at the time. So you can just let me know and I'll try and get to it as we are going through. So we would like to start with our division contact information. Our interim director right now is Mr. Keith Bynum, and the division manager is Crystal Boyce. So if you are unable to get the satisfaction that you need from myself or from my partner in compliance, Mr. Credit, then you can reach out to Crystal and she's always available. If at any time you can't hear me or I sound echoey because I am in this little room that's like a closet, just let me know once you come in. Okay, here are our team members. It will be myself, Mr. Johnny Craddock, who some of you may have as a compliance monitor, and our community involvement coordinator, Ms. Karen Franklin. A lot of times you may get emails just regarding information for your tenants as far as give outs and giveaways or anything of that nature. Those will come from Ms. Karen. She's out in the community to help those that are in need. So we have that information. So about us, we are the City of Houston Housing and Community Development Department is a program that is designed to increase the supply of affordable housing for a sustained period of time. We do that by capping rents at affordable levels and restricting occupancy to low and very low income households. So a lot of your properties may be layered with tax credit as well as the home funding program. Home is just a grant that, or CDBG, it may be CDBG funding as well. Home CDBG would be the grant that is given to the owner developer with the intent to provide affordable housing for the community. Today, we will be discussing your tenant certification. This is the information that will be needed upon entrance to the community. Your rent restrictions, sometimes you may be labeled other programs, your unit mix, the lease requirements, annual recertifications, the annual compliance review, and the forms and reporting. So we are going to begin with your tenant certification. This will kind of detail just what's needed when the tenant actually comes into the community. Normally when we're in person, it's good just to see who is new to working with the program and who's not. Also, who's worked with tax credit before or if you've layered with any other programs. But unfortunately here, I can't see that information. I'm so sorry I missed seeing everyone in person. So a lot of times, if you have worked with another one of our programs, or if your property is layered with tax credit, then the home program will come extremely easy because it's a lot of the same information. And as the City of Houston, our goal as your PJ, which would be your participating jurisdiction, is to make the home process as simple as possible. So we do accept a lot of the tax credit forms in lieu of the home forms, so you don't have to double down. If for any reason you feel like your property may be doing double work, then you could always send your forms to myself or Mr. Credit, and we can review them just to say, okay, if you're using this one for tax credit, you don't have to do double the work for home, because I know some of the properties may have double side, like may have a home side, may have a tax credit side. So it just kind of depends, but we try and make it as easy as possible. So when your tenant comes in, your tenant eligibility. As far as your application, there is no required form. The City of Houston does have a form on their website that you can use. You are able to use your property created form. You can use the TAA rental application. The only requirement is that if you use the TAA rental application, that you use the supplemental application as well. We do accept the HUD application and the TDHTA application. So we pretty much, as long as they are filling out some form of application, that would be sufficient for what we would accept. We just want to make sure that when you're screening for us, that your application must include the Social Security number for any household member over the age of 6. Your spouse can do the same application that you. They must be completed in its entirety. We do not accept any whiteout. These are all typical things that you will find with your normal apartment community, and absolutely no pencil. You wouldn't believe this, but I've gone out on site and a lot of the applications were completed in pencil. So no pencils as well. We want to make sure that when we are determining the number of household members, that we also determine the rent restriction level for the household at that same time. You would do that by referring to your home income and rent limits. Those are released on an annual basis, normally around the month of June. You'll get your new income and rent restrictions. I will send those out to all the property emails that I have, just in case you don't have it. I know Mr. Credit will send them out. In the event you feel like you're not using the most recent income or rent limits, then you could always email us and we'll send you those. Here is the most recent. You could also get them from the HUD website, but your most recent income limits. And so we can look at it for a person, a one person household, at a 30% income limit, their income cannot exceed $16,600. A lot of times, if your property is layered with another funding source, then you would need to use the most restrictive of the two programs. At this time, I think for some of the income limits, that home is the more restrictive program. I know that for your rents, I think HUD home is the more restrictive of the programs. Don't quote me on that, but you'll have to look at both, or your compliance team will look at both of the information and then pick the most restrictive. I can say this, that for home, there is no allowance for you to go over the income limit at recertification. So I know for tax credit that at recertification you can go up to 120% of the income amount. Home does not allow that same um, flexibility. So if your tenant is over income at recertification, unfortunately, then we would have to see if that unit, they can be switched to a high unit or a higher designation unit that would allow for the income to be higher. If they are already at the 80% cap, then you will be temporarily out of compliance because they don't allow for the tenant to reach the 120% mark. So that's also something that you would want to watch for if your property is layered with tax credit. So as far as your tenant certification, the household members that classify for eligibility would be the head of household, a spouse if they are applicable, your co-head, and your dependents. And so now we're going to talk about who we count as a household member. So anyone that's going to be in your household year round, anyone residing in the home more than 50% of the year. This rule kind of normally goes for children that may be under the shared custody agreement with another parent, members that are temporarily away, so that means children and adults, unborn children. And this is big, that you are allowed to list the unborn child, but that's only if it's disclosed that the mother is with child. Other than that, we please don't make any assumptions. Children under joint custody who are present more than half of the year, children in the process of being adopted, children temporarily absent due to placement in foster care. So those are things that you want to look for when you're including your applicants in the household. For HUD Home Programs, a household is not eligible for occupancy if the household contains a full or part-time student at an institution of higher education. And all of the following statements are true for the student if. So What happens with the home program and the Section 8 program, if your property is layered, they have a lot of the same student rules. Tax credits student rules are slightly different. So if you're going to have a household that's going to contain the whole household is full of students, then you want to be sure that you are meeting all of the student rules, and that's for the entire household, especially if you're blended. So if the property is blended, then you want to make sure that you're meeting the tax credit rules as well as the home. These are just some other rules that would apply if there is a student in the household. Now, the student rules get really detailed. So if there is a question regarding that, then you can send it to our email and we could kind of go through and see if the household is going to is still going to be eligible after all of the student rules. Who does not count as a household member? That would be a living aid or children under joint custody if they're in the unit less than 50% of the year. So when they come in, it's kind of easy to see if the household is going to look eligible for the home program. If yes, then we're going to continue the process, obtain the tenant authorization and release form, and then all of the other information as detailed. If no, then if your property has any units that's unrestricted or market units or just tax credit units, then you could refer them to those units, or you can place them on a waiting list. But it's always necessary to verify income and the assets that they are disclosing. So your tenant certification, and this is kind of going to detail the income and assets for the property. So what's counted as income? Any income from earning, any income from assets, self-employment, Social Security benefits, any type of pension or retirement benefits. I know a big one now would be the unemployment benefits. So that's all information that you want to detail. We include the income from earnings, and that includes the overtime, any commissions, fee tips, and bonuses. Make sure that we're using the gross amount. So a lot of times I'll see where a property would want to, if the tenant doesn't have their Social Security award letter, they would want to use a bank statement because that amount goes directly into the bank. A lot of times that doesn't include the gross amount, so they'll still have to go back and get the award letter so we can see the full amount of what's being given to the tenant, because we do use the amount before deductions. We include any salaries received from a family-owned business, any Social Security payments. If the Social Security is reduced to adjust for a prior overpayment, we count the amount that is being provided after the adjustment. We want to include child support, workers' compensation, unemployment, recurring monetary gifts, military pay, retirement funds, and pensions. We want to include the court order unless a household can certify that it's not being received. So we want to go to the greatest extent feasible to make sure that that money is not being received before we don't count it. We have some unusual sources of income that would include the delayed periodic payments received because of delays in processing unemployment, payments from annuities and insurance policies, actual income distributed from trust funds, alimony, severance pay, disability, death benefits, and other similar types of periodic receipts. What we don't want to include as far as income. So employment earnings from children under the age of 18, unless that child is emancipated and they are the head of household or co-head of household, and they also have to have the information stating that they are an emancipated adult. Payments under Section 8, comparable rental assistance, deferred periodic payments from Social Security, earnings in excess of 480 for full-time students 18 and older, adoption payment in excess of 480, income of a living aid, and any loans and business loans are not included. Temporary, non-recurring, or sporadic income, SNAP, contributions that are paid directly to the child care provider by persons not living in the unit, special paid to a family member in the armed forces, amounts received under training programs, and any resident stipend not to exceed $200 per month. So the way that we like to see your income provided would be in the form of paycheck stubs, Social Security award letters, not really bank statements. I gotta take that part off. Third party written, which would be your employer verifications. You can also send your employer the source. That would be via mail. I know we say fax, but I don't know if people are really using fax machines at this time. But you could also email. Do email them. Then you would need to put that, print that email, put that with your file, and current email, put that in your file. We also want to make sure that when we are sending the employer verification, are mindful of the email address that we're actually sending to, and that it'll be at that company's or basically, yeah, at that company's name and not just to a random person who may be the tenant's friend. The faxes must include the company name and fax number, so it shouldn't be just an Office Depot fax or a FedEx fax strip at the top unless that person actually works for Office Depot or FedEx. Um, and then any clarifications can be done via telephone. Just make sure that you are providing the information the question asks to them via clarification record or and the answer via clarification record. And then this is just a brief example of how we like to see the calculation for the income, which should be included in every file. A lot of people, a lot of times, if it's a Social Security award letter, they'll do the actual calculation of that Social Security award and just put the tape on that letter. I've seen some properties where they have actual calculation pages. I know that if you print the form that we have on our website, it'll the take form, it'll come in the form of 4 pages, and that's just because that last page is actually a calculation page where you can put your running tape as far as what your calculation is. So if you have weekly wages, we want to multiply them by 52, bi-weekly 26, semi-monthly 24, and monthly by 12. We want to use the year-to-date amount for what those income amounts would be. Okay, so I have a brief question here. And if you don't mind playing a small game with me, then you could do this small calculation with your answers in the chat box. We will take yeah, that's so exciting. Okay, great. So here's our answer. It's A, and I actually have the calculation here on the next page, even though a lot of people think I'm 5%. And here's how we got that calculation. The question said that she was paid semi-monthly and not bi-weekly. I don't know if that is where the difference in the amount may have come from for some people, but it's semi-monthly. So you thank you guys so much for engaging me and playing my small games. I do have, I think, one or two more. Okay, so when you are looking at your assets, we want to make sure that you are using the cash value of the checking and 6 months average Cash value of checking is 6 months average and the savings is the current balance. The equity in real property or other capital investments, cash value of trust available to the household, any stocks, bonds, savings certificates, and other investment accounts, IRAs, and similar retirement accounts. All those are calculated. I know the biggest thing that we see when it comes to assets is that they aren't detailed on the under 5K asset verification form, and that they'll sit on the checking on your paycheck stub, and they aren't listed on the tenants under 5K form, and those assets aren't verified. So if the tenant has a job, like I would say, like the city of Houston, the city of Houston will detail everything on your paycheck stub. So it's hard for me to see a tenant that works for the city of Houston in any department just because I know what those check stubs look like. And I won't see any details as far as what is counted as an asset. So just make sure that when we are looking, and another small thing that it could be like a huge pet peeve of mine is that the tenant will say that they don't have a checking account and they don't want to list that information, but they also have direct deposit. And you can see the direct deposit on the paycheck stub, but they'll say they don't have a checking account. So just be mindful of those small things that I see often. And we just have to be mindful of how we're verifying that information. We also want to count assets of cash value of hold or universal life insurance, personal property, held as an investment, lump sum receipts. Um, do you guys see that little message for my software? It needs to be updated. Sorry. Any mortgage or deed of trust held by an applicant, assets disposed of for less than fair market value during the 2 years preceding the certification. Asset exclusions, necessary personal property interest in an Indian trust fund, life insurance policy that are not available before the death, equity in the cooperative unit in which the family live, assets that are a part of an active business, assets that are not effectively owned by a family, assets not accessible to the family and which provide no income to the family, all vehicles, especially those equipped for disabled. So if you can't access it or use it right now, it does not count as an asset. When we're determining the cash value of the assets, we want to say that the cash value equals the market value minus the cost to convert that asset to cash. So costs must be reasonable and may include penalties for premature withdrawals, brokerage and legal fees, real estate and settlement costs, and any amounts still owed. A lot of times you can get that information from the deed of sale. If it's a house, then they'll have that all that information disclosed in the information that they get from the broker. Your tenant certification. So this is basically your under 5K form. Obviously, if they have assets that are over 5,000, then you do not need the under 5K form to verify those assets. But if there are assets that are under 5,000, then they will need to be listed on the under 5K form. And that is where we will see what is there. So, small example. So here I have just an example of what section, I think it's section 3 of what the tick would look like. It adds to detail the household member, that type of asset for the household member, I'm sorry, the cash value of that asset, the interest amount, and the income gained from that asset. So if the total assets are greater than or equal to 5,000, then we're going to determine the imputed income. If not, we're going to use the income from the asset. So at this account, our total value is less than 5,000, so we'll just use the income that we gathered from the asset. For example 2, this person has, it's kind of detailed the same way, but they have over $5,000 worth of assets. So this person will not need an under 5K asset form, and the total assets are greater than or equal to 5,000. So we will have to determine the imputed income. Imputed will be $3.30. And the income from the asset is $100. So I actually put the wrong amount. I'm sorry. You would use the income from the asset, which was the higher of the two. And what I want to make sure is that when we are doing the imputed income, that you're multiplying the total amount at 0.06% and not 0.6%, because that'll be a huge difference in what your actual amount would be. So we want to make sure that we're paying attention to that. So here we have an applicant that owns a house with a fair market value of $100,000. There's an outstanding mortgage of $50,000 on the home. If the applicant were to sell the home, the total settlement cost would be $5,000. So this is the total settlement cost would be all those extra costs that it would take to convert this actual asset to cash. And here you will have your fair market value, the outstanding mortgage, and the amount to convert to cash. And then you would just do a small little subtraction here, and you would get the cash value of the asset at being 45,000. A lot of times they aren't this simple, but all the information should be detailed, like I said, in the bill of sale or the information provided from the broker. And now we are going to move on to the rent restrictions and maintaining the unit mix. I don't see any questions in the chat box right now, and I don't see any hand raised. So I will assume that I am doing an awesome job, and we're going to keep moving unless you put a question. Your rent restrictions. So during the affordability period, owners must ensure that rents they charge for the home assistance rental units do not exceed the home rent limits. Listed below, listed in this little box, are your home rent limits. Like I said, these will change on an annual basis, normally in about June, because they're normally effective July 1st. The HUD published rent limits include what your utilities would include. When a tenant pays directly for your utilities, the owner manager must subtract the approved utility allowance to determine the maximum rent that can be charged for the unit. So these are what the home rent limits include. Your home rents cannot exceed this amount, whether it's a recertification or a incoming new prospect. Maintaining the required number of assistant units is important. So your high rent limits and your low rent limits is called complying with the unit mix. So a lot of times in your restrictive covenants, so if I have compliance monitors on the phone, then they'll have access to what your land use restrictive covenants are. And it'll detail how many units at that property are supposed to be restricted and at what rate they're supposed to be restricted at. So 80/30 or 50% units would be considered low. Any 60 or 80% units or anything 60% and above are considered your high home units. There are a certain amount of units. So let's say you have 50 units at your property that are going to be restricted, and it details that you have to have 25 low, 25 high. So that means you can have 25 at 30, 40, 50%, and 25 at 60 or 80%. Properties with fixed units have to maintain the unit mix that they have at the very beginning of the property. So if your land use, if your law states that your units are fixed, then 101, 102, and 103 must remain at the same designation the entire time of your affordability period. If your units are floating, that means that if someone moves out and you are out of compliance or this one needs to be a market unit, then you can assign 201 to be a home unit, and now 101 doesn't have to be a home unit. So you're able to move those designations throughout. And if 101 starts at a 50%, but now you need a high unit and 101 moves out, you can now make 101 a high unit. So most of our properties now are floating. So you don't have the problem where it sticks to 101 being 50% the entire time of your affordability period. Just so we know, the affordability period is the amount of time that your property must utilize these home rent limits. So a lot of times it'll be maybe 20 years, 30 years. And I have been seeing some 40 years for the newer properties that we have coming on. But if you need any of this information at all, please feel free to reach out to your assigned compliance monitor and we'll get that to you just so you're aware of how many units you're supposed to have that are home if they're fixed or floating. And here is just some more information on whether your units are fixed or floating, but I think I kind of detailed what that would be considered of. So I was in a training and I ran across this really cool tool that is, it details what the income limit would be for a tax credit program, income limit requirements for the home program, and then if you combine the two programs. So if your property is layered with both properties, it kind of details all of the rent limit requirements, the income definitions, everything that you would need, how you would do your calculations if your project is layered with tax credit at home. So it's an awesome tool. It's here in the PowerPoint presentation if you need it. I want to see if I can put it into a document that we could email to you all. That way you could put it on your leasing assistants, your leasing managers, and everyone who's leasing, to put them on their board so they can become familiar if the property is layered with both programs. I've come up with another quiz. This one is true or false. So you can either write A or B in the chat box or true or false in the chat box. It says a property has 6 home units. One of the low home households goes over income property designate a non-assisted unit as a is that true or false? That's all right. That is definitely false. If it is a fixed community, please don't redesignate a non-assisted unit as a low home unit to remain in compliance. So now we're going to move on to lease requirements. So we are actually pretty generous with the type of lease that you can use. You can use the HUD model lease. You can use the TAA lease. Sometimes properties will have their own leases as long as they are approved by your compliance monitor. And normally all of those documents have to be approved before you can actually begin lease up of the property. Then you could use those leases as well. But most people will normally either use the HUD model lease or the TAA lease. Those are both extremely safe. Any lease addendum, if you are going to use your own lease, then the prohibited lease terms, the lease may not contain any of the following provisions: the agreement to be sued, treatment of property, excusing the owner from responsibility, waiver of notice, waiver of legal proceedings, waiver of a jury trial, waiver of right to appeal court decision, tenant chargeable with cost of legal actions regardless of the outcome. All tenant files must contain a lease addendum. And when I say lease addendum, that is one of these cute little addendums. One of them is the TAA lease addendum, which if you can see 6.2 says home program. And so that kind of details everything that you would need for the home to know as far as your lease addendum for the home program. Or it would be the City of Houston home addendum, which you can find on our website. Either is acceptable. Your grievance procedures. So we want to make sure that your grievance procedures are included in your tenant selection plan. A lot of times they are, it's approved when you are in the form of lease up, because one of the documents that is required for approval from your compliance monitor would be the tenant selection plan. But we want to make sure that the tenant is available to address their concerns by someone who is not managing or not working on the management staff on a daily basis. And the grievance procedure, should clearly state to whom a tenant to whom they should have a complaint with, who they'll need to investigate, and when they should expect a response as far as the actions that they are complaining about. We want to make sure that you do have clear grievance procedures, because your tenants will reach out to me, they'll reach out to Mr. Craddock, they'll reach out to our Fair Housing Department. And before we are involved in a tenant complaint, it's best that you can handle it on site. That way you get ahead of it. Your disclosure requirements: if your property is built prior to January 1st, 1978, then you will need a lead-based paint addendum. If not, then this is a document that you do not need to be concerned about. So your annual recertifications. Owners must establish a routine schedule for performing the annual income recertification. The schedule can be based on the anniversary of the original income verification for the tenant. It can be based on the time of lease renewal. I know a lot of times those two dates kind of coincide with each other. So in my head, it seems like that would be the easiest time to do it. I know some people do them based on building. So it's just based on however it's going to work for your property, for your staff. But an annual recertification should be done every year. Recertification documents. So if you're doing a full recert, then the following documents must be examined to determine tenant eligibility. That's the application. You need a new tenant release and consent form, your lease with addendums, the tenant income certification, that'll also be known as your TIC, and source documentation. A lot of times the site will be using the one-page AEC, and that's TDHCA's recertification version. We will accept that form if you have been approved for self-certification prior to beginning that. So you can do it, but you will need to send a written request to your compliance monitor to request for to be able to do self-certifications, and they're done on the 6-year time frame. So every 6th year, you will be required to do a full recertification. Now, I have to say this, because we're reviewing files now electronically, if you are using the self-certifications, then you will be required to send the information, the source documentation and the calculations from the last full research so that we can see what the income actually was. Also, if your tenant's income changes at the time of recertification and you are using self-cert, then you will need to obtain that source documentation because the income changed and you'll need to do another calculation. So I've been seeing that a lot, especially with receiving the files electronically, that the tenant's income will change and the source documentation isn't included because it's just not. Hey, I got another quiz here. It says add recertification to household in a household in a floating low home income increase that takes them from very low to low income category. Proper course correction is. Is to rent the next available high home unit as a low home unit, and then redesignate the over income unit as a high home unit. So now we're going to talk about our favorite part of the year, and that would be the annual compliance review. So on an annual basis, an on-site monitoring review will be conducted to review the tenant records, inspect units, assisted units, and observe actual program operations, to ensure compliance with the program rules. So on an annual basis, myself or Mr. Credit will come out and review your files. If we were not in the midst of a horrible pandemic, then we would come out to your site and review your tenant files. We have been reviewing your files electronically, and that's just to make sure that you guys are safe and we're safe as well. So when we are reviewing those files, when we come out to your site or when you're emailing us your documents, we want to see your tenant files, your occupancy report, your affirmative marketing plan, and any type of marketing that you are doing toward that affirmative marketing plan, your tenant selection plan, any waiting list that you have, your notice to vacates and refusal letters, any increases, and that's just to make sure that you are providing a fair 30-day rent increase and your fair housing requirements within your office. Normally that comes in a form of a photograph, and they'll attach the photograph to the email. What will happen is, if you are not familiar with what the program, if you're not familiar with an annual compliance review, then approximately 35 to 40 days, I will reach out to either the compliance director or the property manager on site and schedule a date for your compliance review. After that, you will receive a formal letter via email just detailing the dates and the number of files that you will need to have readily available for the review. Sometimes we come out to the actual site, and sometimes we have been receiving those files electronically. Once we receive if it's going to be electronic, then we will need to receive those files on or before the actual date listed on the letter. If we're going to come out to your site, then we'll be there on the morning of the date listed on your letter, no later than 10 a.m., and then we will review the files. At this same time, you may receive a call from your physical inspector stating the date that they will come out and walk the property and review your common areas. Your forms and reporting. Oh, I'm sorry. And after we've done the complete inspection, maybe 3 to 4 business days later, you'll receive a report detailing if there were any findings on site. Normally, if there is a finding, we'll try and rectify it while we're there. If the finding cannot be rectified while we're there, then we'll give you 15 days from the date that you receive your compliance report. And you have 15 days to rectify that, and then you'll email the corrections to us. The forms and reporting. So we don't require many forms from you, which is a great thing. But if you are going to need any forms as far as to put in your files, then they are listed on our website. Your files should be organized in an efficient and simple manner. So I like to say that they should basically read like a book. If I see your income, then technically, if I see the source documentation, then technically I should see the income somewhere really close to that. Following that should probably be any assets or anything that should be detailed as far as income as well. All of your forms, as long as all of the files are detailed and all of the files are the same way, then it makes it very easy for us to go through and complete your file review. One of the main reports that we will need from you will be your quarterly compliance review. I do have a property testing out a new template for me right now, so you may be receiving an email with a new template for your compliance review. And it probably won't be for the September 1st to the 30th, because I don't want to put that type of pressure on everyone as far as getting it done by October 15th. But it will definitely be for the December 1st to December 31st compliance review. And then maybe a new template, which should be much easier for everyone as far as us reviewing them and you submitting them. The report highlights for us to ensure that you guys are charging the right amount of rents, and it's important for us to see that the unit designations and the incomes are in line with what the program requirements state. The other form that is required for submittal would be a rent schedule form. There's also a new template for the rent schedule form. I am finalizing that one right now, and it should be sent out by the middle of October. That way, when you submit your utility allowances, because they're normally released at the end of the year, they should be on the new rent schedule template. I will probably host another small training just to detail both of those documents, since they should be released at the same time. Your rent schedule, just along with your current utility schedule. And we use this to make sure that your income calculations are correct and that there is no tenant being overcharged rent or as far as your utility allowance. Rent changes. The owner is never required to decrease rent below initial rents approved by the PJ, which would be us. So your initial rent schedule, your rents don't ever have to go lower than that. And that'll probably be the one The rent schedule that is sent way, way, way at the very beginning of when your property is in lease up stages. The owner may be able to raise the tenant's rent depending on changes to the HUD published home rent limits, changes in the utility allowances, or changes in the tenant's income. PJs must approve all rent increases. Rent adjustments for occupied units are subject to the terms of the tenant's lease. So when you submit your rent schedule, it's important for you to put the maximum amount that home allows in the last column F, and I do have the template on this form, so I'll be able to show it to you. And that just means if you change your rents at any time for incoming tenants, you don't have to keep submitting your rent schedule, because as long as you don't go over what the home max is, you're still in compliance. Rent changes: the owner must lower the rents if HUD published home rent limits decrease, or if the tenant pays utilities and the utility allowance increases more than the HUD published home rent limits. So this is what the new form will look like. There are, like I said, some small changes that I need to make. But if you can see here, on column F, it says HUD max rent limits. So that's where you would put our maximums. I know a lot of times you'll put your tax credit maximums, or you'll put the tax credit rents. And I always hate to say this because it sounds so rude, but we don't care about your tax credit maximums. I'm sorry. We just want you to put the home max rent limits here. That way we can make sure that we are approving our rent amounts. And then we want to be sure that, again, that you are restrictive. You're using the most restrictive of the two rents. But the new form should be here. It's actually automated, so you can fill it out online. You'll be able to type in all of your information and then just add your signature and date at the bottom. So we are hoping to make your lives a little bit easier. Your utility allowances. The owner must establish a maximum monthly allowance for utilities. You can use the HUD schedule model or otherwise determine the utility allowance for the project based on the type of utilities that are used at the projects. What we see most is the HUD utility model, or if you have obtained the third-party vendor utility allowance, or you can use the one from your local housing authority, which would be the Houston Housing Authority for us. This is what the rent schedule from the housing authority would look like. The HUD model looks very similar to this, and it's automated as well, as you can kind of fill it in. But this needs to be included with when you submit your rent schedule. Other than that, it won't be approved. Your regulatory reminders: we want to make sure that your fair housing poster is posted in your office. This is something that's very general, and I know that you guys have it, so we don't need to detail that anymore. But we want to make sure that every property knows that we are in compliance and we are participating in the fair housing laws. This is just where the regulatory citations will be, just so you guys know that I am not pulling this information from the air. This is where we get all of our citations from CFR 24. So now we have time for any questions and comments. You can put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and unmute if you'd like. Or if you don't want to do that, then you can email them. I am now putting my email in the chat. And I think a good bit of you have my email address already, especially if you've had a compliance review anytime over the past year, then I know for sure you should have my email address. I'm also putting Mr. Craddock's email address in the chat if there are any questions for him at all. I thank you so much for participating and for listening to me talk about rules. I know that sometimes this information isn't the most entertaining. That's why I hate that we can't do it in person, but I hope that I didn't completely bore your socks off. We have someone typing, so there may be a question. Oh, she says, still wearing my socks. Thank you so much, Miss Diane. So if there are no questions, comments or concerns, then again, we thank you guys so much. If you need anything at all, please do not hesitate to reach out to myself or Mr. Credit. We are here to help and make sure that this process is as seamless as possible. I know compliance isn't fun. I know compliance on site isn't fun. I worked on site for years. So I know that it's not the entertainment. Thank you so much. And thank you for all the warm comments. You will receive a survey via email. So I think I have everyone's sign-in information. You will receive an email. So if you can complete those and send them back to me, this will help us in the future. But just kind of trying to make this training as informative and I don't want to say entertaining, but not boring as possible. I can email you the printable or the PDF for this if you just put your email in the chat for me, Miss Ramos. That way I can be sure I have it. Yes, if you just put your information in the chat, that way I can be sure I have it. I can get this to you. And then if there's any information outside of this, please, like I said, don't hesitate. If that's all, then you can log off now. Thank you so much. But just put your information in the chat before we leave, and I'm going to stop the recording now.